Today I'm going to talk about some of the tools that as a gemologist I use to help me identify gems. And a lot of these tools are very accessible, so I'm going to talk about them because if you have a particular interest in gemology or you just love it as a hobby, and even if you just love going to yard sales or estate sales or anything like that, these tools are going to help you start to identify different gems and help you kind of maybe sort through some jewelry that you might be interested in buying. Now, I will say as a little bit of a disclaimer that gems that are mounted in jewelry are definitely a lot harder to identify than when we're looking at gemstones loose. And this is because oftentimes the jewelry and the mounting, depending on the style, can really hinder how we can look at that gem. So if it's set, for example, very deep, it can be hard to get a reading on it, and they can also very much affect how light passes through the stone, which is one of the ways we definitely identify gems. Of course, as gemologists, we tend to have many tools at our disposal, and so if one doesn't work, we can go to a few others to help confirm our testing and get proper results. So the first tool I'm going to talk about is the Dichroscope, which is this little tool right here, and it has kind of a nut shape on the bottom there, and you can definitely find these at gem supply stores either in person or online. And this one actually came from Amazon, and they have a great price point. They are generally well under $100, and that combined with how small they are, they can definitely just fit into your pocket. For example, if you're going shopping at an estate sale or a yard sale, that makes it one of the more accessible tools that you can start with. So it's a great one to keep in mind. So this is how we're going to use the Dichroscope. Essentially, you hold it the opposite end so that the bolt shape is on the opposite side of your eye. You're going to aim it towards a very bright light source, either the sun if you're outside or the main light in the room that you're in. And then you're going to hold the gem with tweezers or your fingers as close to the opposite side as possible. And essentially what the Dichroscope is telling us is whether the gemstone is pleochroic or not. Pleochroism is essentially when a gemstone splits light that passes through it in two different directions, and the majority of gemstones are pleochroic. Some of them are more dramatic than others. So for example, a tanzanite is very pleochroic to the point where we can often see those two different colors just by looking at the top of the gem with our own eye. We often see a bluish color as well as a violet or purplish color. Other gems like emerald or ruby or sapphire, they're pleochroic, but they tend to be less dramatically pleochroic. So we definitely need the Dichroscope to check that. And essentially what we're seeing when we're looking through this tool is two square boxes, and they're going to show us the two different colors of how that light is passing through the gem. So for example, if we're looking at a tanzanite, we're going to see those two different dramatic colored boxes. We're going to see the blue and we're going to see the violet or the purple. With a ruby or an emerald, we're going to see it be a lot less dramatic. We're going to see one colored box be red and the other box be purplish red. Now, how we double check those results if we do see the two different colored boxes is, again, we're holding the Dichroscope to our eye, we're holding the gem in front, we see the two different colored boxes, and we're essentially going to turn the Dichroscope with our fingers a full turn. And if those two colored boxes switch sides, it means that the gem is definitely pleochroic. This might sound a little complicated, but it definitely just requires some practice. So if you do get a Dichroscope, practice with some of the jewelry and maybe even some stones that you have at home. And this way you can start to see those two different colored boxes, and again, sometimes they can be more dramatic and sometimes it can be very subtle. And if you get used to maybe how subtle it can be when you're out in the field or at a sale or something of that nature, you can start to expect a little bit more of what you're looking for. So for example, some of the only gemstones that are not pleochroic are diamond, which can't be tested with the Dichroscope because it only works with colored gems. And the other ones include garnet, spinel, and zircon. So for example, if you are out in the field and you see a beautiful ring and it has a gorgeous red stone, you can use your Dichroscope to look right through the center of that red stone, again holding it to the light. And if you see the two colored boxes and you turn the Dichroscope and they switch places, that's telling you that the stone is definitely pleochroic. So the chances that beautiful red gemstone is a ruby is much higher than, for example, it being a much less valuable stone like a garnet or even a piece of glass or plastic. An example of using the Dichroscope with a green stone could be you might find a green tourmaline, and tourmalines are very pleochroic, so they tend to show two dramatically different green squares. Generally a lighter and a much darker tone of the same green in the Dichroscope. If it's two different green squares and they're less dramatic, so maybe a green and a slightly bluish green, that could tell you that it's an emerald. And again, if you don't see any difference in the colored squares whatsoever, it could be a garnet, or again, it could be glass or plastic. So again, we're not going to get any definitive answers with this one small tool, but it is very inexpensive, very easy to bring with you, and can really help you set apart some very inexpensive stones to things that are maybe much more interesting and might have a lot more value. The second tool that, again, is very inexpensive and easy to find is the UV light, and you can definitely find this on Amazon, and this one is battery powered. And essentially what this is going to help us do is start to kind of separate natural gems from potentially synthetic gems. So of course this is just a rule of thumb, and there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. So for example, very high quality rubies and emeralds that tend to have very high levels of chromium, and this means that they have been formed in metamorphic environments. They can definitely show fluorescence, definitely, especially with rubies. That's one of their kind of trademark traits. However, again, if you know you're in an environment where you may not be likely to come across kind of something that's super high value, very high price point, but you're kind of weeding through some other things, the UV light can definitely help you separate some synthetic gemstones, especially that were very popular kind of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I would say. So for example, pretty much every synthetic ruby that I've come across definitely fluoresces in UV light. And the other thing to note is that when it does fluoresce, it has a very kind of unnatural and kind of like crazy red, bright, like Rudolph red reaction to the UV light. Whereas even if you have a very high quality ruby that fluoresces, it's never going to give you that kind of crazy, unnatural, very, very bright red reaction in the UV light. So that is always kind of a good tell for me that the ruby is synthetic. And then with emeralds, I would say it's even easier because coming across a natural emerald that does show fluorescence is quite rare. And if you, again, are in an environment where you're not likely to come across a 5-figure, 6-figure emerald, and it does fluoresce a bright red with your UV light, chances are it's probably synthetic. And I see this mostly with hydrothermal processed synthetic emeralds. They're the ones that give you that very wavy texture when you look at them under a little bit of magnification. So again, what you're going to do is just turn on your UV light and you hold it very close to the gemstone, and you're going to want to have it on a neutral background, something white or gray, and with no light reflection. That's very important because it can kind of change the results. And sometimes you need to hold it on there for a couple of seconds. Sometimes the fluorescence doesn't happen immediately. It takes, a couple of seconds to warm up. The other interesting thing that you can do with a UV light is look at pearls. So most cultured pearls do fluoresce a light blue under the UV light. Again, it's just a rule of thumb, so you could definitely come across some natural pearls that don't. But again, if you find glass or plastic imitation pearls, and they can be very difficult to tell apart with just your natural eye, especially if you're just looking in a store or again outside at a yard sale or something like that. The glass or plastic is generally not going to fluoresce under the UV, so that can be another quick trick for you to double check that when you're out in the field. And again, one of the most popular stones that does generally fluoresce are diamonds. But the thing with fluorescence and diamonds is it's not really telling you much about the stone, to be honest. But if you are shopping for a diamond and a lot of them have blue fluorescence and that's something that you don't like, or maybe that you do like, of course you can always check that yourself with a long wave UV light, but it's not really telling you much about the internal structure, whether it's synthetic or the quality of the diamond, to be honest. And lastly, just to note that a UV light, again, that you're gonna find like this on Amazon or other online stores or even at hardware stores, is a long wave UV light. And it can be dangerous to your eye. You definitely don't wanna stare at it with your own eye for long periods of time or very long at all. But other UV light that labs use, gemological labs, is shortwave UV light. And you can get definitely different results with a shortwave light, just because different gems will react differently to either long wave or shortwave. But shortwave is not something that I have, or you generally can have access to outside of a scientific laboratory, and that's because it is quite dangerous and you can really damage your eyes by using that. So when you're shopping, you're definitely looking for a long wave UV light. So the next tool I'm going to talk about is another light, and it's the Mini Maglite. And this is something that's very popular with gemologists, and that's because versus an LED light, which is definitely easier to find and more popular, the LED light, or the Maglite, sorry, is an incandescent light. And essentially this helps us to see gemstones and how they might change color in daylight, which is fluorescent light, versus incandescent light. And of course, if you do have a color change gem, which is a phenomenon that can occur in sapphires or garnets or very expensive alexandrites, this is the tool we're going to look to see how strong that color change is and what the two different hues are that the gem is changing to. So because this is such a strong and pointed light, it really helps us get down to the nitty-gritty of what that color change is. And it also can help you with another phenomenon, which is seeing stars in star sapphires or even diopside. So it's really helpful with that because, again, if you're in a showroom or something, they tend to have LED lights that are, very small and lots of them, so there's lots of different sources of light, whereas this is very pointed, very strong light, and you can get right up to the gemstone. It can help you see the color better, especially if you're away from your microscope, and it can just really help you get a really good look at it. Another tip I'll say with this, you can see with mine here, is I have a rubber stopper on the bottom, and that just helps me hold the Maglite up 90 degrees so it can stand on its own on my desk. And that way I can sit sometimes the gemstone right on top to help me check for transparency and, again, phenomenon, and even with my spectroscope, which is a bit of a more complex tool I won't talk about today. But if you are going to use a Maglite, you need to make sure that you're changing the batteries very often, and sometimes even the flashlight. And generally there's actually an extra flashlight in these Maglites. You can look that up, just because you're going to want as strong and bright as light as possible. So next is the loupe, and this is definitely probably one of the most common tools that you should start with, and I definitely recommend sticking to a 10 meg loupe. I know when you look online, you can get even, 30x or 45x, and I would definitely recommend starting with 10. It can be a lot less complicated and easier to use, and you definitely want to practice with using that. So the best way to use this is actually to put the loupe right on your finger like that, because it's going to help you be steady. And if you can, you're going to want to place your elbow on a flat surface like a desk or on a counter, and then you're going to hold your gemstone right in front of it and hold it, I would say, about an inch from your eye, and then the gemstone should also be about an inch from the loupe. And you can see I'm kind of balancing my finger on my cheek here, and again, that's just helping me stay steady, so that I can kind of use my eyes to really focus on what I want to look at. And the key tip with the loupe is that you definitely want to keep both of your eyes open. It feels kind of natural to kind of do it with one eye when you're trying to focus, one or the other. But honestly, in the trade, that's a bit of a dead giveaway that you are a little bit of an outsider. We call it pirate grading because you only have one eye. You definitely want to keep both open so you can see everything. And essentially with the loupe, especially when you're first starting out, this is really going to help you see, when you look at a gem up close, any perfectly circular inclusions, which are gas bubbles, and that's going to give away if a stone is glass or plastic. You can look at the facets up close, and if they're not super sharp and they have a bit of a rounded look to them, like a molded look, that's also kind of giving away glass or plastic, usually plastic if it's molded. And then the other thing it's going to help with is finding surface reaching inclusions. So we might not be able to see, very deep inclusions, but we can see any fractures or, bigger chips that have come, right to the surface of the stone, and especially helpful with emeralds, I would say. And if you're out shopping for those and you see that, that's definitely something you're gonna want to reconsider purchasing. And again, when it comes to diamonds, if you're looking at a piece of diamond jewelry or a loose diamond with your loupe, you're gonna be able to see a lot more inclusions, especially dark carbon marks, and again, chips that we might not be able to see with our eye. So it can be really helpful with that as well. Last but not least, I'm gonna talk about the refractometer, and this is definitely a much more expensive tool. They're generally around the $1,000 mark, I would say. You can get more hobby level refractometers. I have seen them on Amazon, maybe for a few $100s. I've never tried one, so I can't say how effective or accurate they are. And you can definitely find more expensive ones as well. One thing I'll say is that this particular model, which is sold by the GIA, does have a completely removable magnifier, and then most refractometers you can also remove the lens from the magnifier, and basically removing the magnifier allows you to do what is called a spot reading, which means you can take the RI of gemstones that are rough or cabochon cut, essentially something that doesn't have a perfectly flat surface. It is very hard to find ones that you can't remove the lens. I don't know why. But this model in particular, you can do that. So again, the refractometer is not necessarily something for the faint of heart, or if you're just starting out, or if this is just a hobby, but it is the main and most important tool, I would say, for any gemologist, which is why I wanted to show you, because this is how we all start our main identification process. This tool also needs to be used with RI liquid, which looks like this, and it is also very important that this is a high quality liquid. There are a few different brands on the market. This one is from Gem Master, and the other important thing is that the liquid has its own RI of 1.81. And essentially how it works is you put a very tiny drop of that liquid onto the gemstone, and then we lift the lid of the refractometer and we're placing the gem on this little screen here, which is made out of glass. And then when we look through the lens, we are seeing a shadow of how the light is passing through the gem, and it's giving us a very specific reading. So for example, with sapphire, it has an RI of 1.60 to 1.68 approximately. So when we get that number, that narrows down what the gemstone could be quite dramatically. Again, there are many similar looking gems that have very similar RIs, so it's definitely not the end all or be all of gem identification, but it's definitely a great starting off point. And if you are very interested in gemology, it might be something you want to explore. The other thing to know about the higher quality RI liquid that I mentioned is that it can be around $100, but this is going to last you a really long time, even up to a year or more, depending on, of course, how often you use it. Lastly, another tool that is not something you can use if maybe you're just going out in the field and looking at jewelry or different gems, and is a little bit more of an investment, is the gem microscope. But I want to mention it because, again, it's the one tool that every gemologist is going to use with pretty much every gem, and is absolutely key to gem identification. If investing in a microscope is something that you are interested in, make sure that you're looking for something that is specifically made for gemological use. You're going to want magnification to be at least 30x. You don't necessarily need any more than that. That's, for example, what I use. And you can generally get eyepieces fitted to most models of microscopes in order to increase magnification. For example, if it's something you want to increase later. And the other thing is that you're going to want different lighting aspects. So most microscopes allow for bright field and dark field lighting, and essentially that's helping you look at the gem under different conditions, and that can help you look for certain characteristics that are going to help you separate it, for example, natural from synthetic, and some other very specific inclusions. If you have any questions about the tools that I've mentioned in this video, including how to use them, feel free to leave your questions in the comments below and I'll get back to you with my answers. Thank you so much for watching, and to learn more about gems and jewelry, be sure to check out some of our other videos, including those on Alexandrites and color change gems and some other things mentioned in this video. And you can also visit our main page at winstongemsandjewelry.com.